Ahoy! New World has had a few problems as of late and has always had some problems, and not all of them will be easy to fix in the future. Maybe we will see some of them being fixed with the hopefully soon coming weapon changes, but for now we have to work with what we got. And I figured, while there are many complicated things to change, there are also some very easy fixes for certain things that could improve the player experience right now with just some simple tweaks. In this video we'll talk about some of them, even though there are of course plenty more. Before we jump in, a quick thanks to my patrons for supporting this video. I've sorted these suggestions by ease of implementation, so the easier something is to do, the earlier I will mention it. Let's begin with a very easy one. No longer requiring tuning orbs for trials, which used to be called arenas. That's bosses like the Spriggan or the Siren Queen. There's not really any logical reasons for these bosses to still have an entry fee when the expeditions don't. Just give them the same type of cap so people can't block others from doing them. In return, the gold reward could simply be reduced. That would make farming them for gypsum or their loot way less of a headache. As I step up, the trials could also be instanced, but that would be a little bit more work, so we're not going to consider that a simple fix. What would however be simple is adding the Shard of Consecrated Iron, the Freedom perk, to more drop tables. Currently this is exclusively refined to content level 1 to 45 in a completely random drop. So there's no way to do a targeted farm for it. The only other way to get it is to get armoring aptitude caches, but even those have a bunch of other perk drops that this one would be competing with. Making such a high demand perk more available would actually encourage crafters to craft more. The same is true for Squirming Vines, which is Shirking Fortification. In this case it drops from chests in Reekwater as well as the depth. However, as far as I was able to find, and also based on all the depth farms that I've done, this isn't true for the mutated version because the chests at the end of the mutated versions are not listed as one of the gathered from options. If Squirming Vines had a decent drop chance from mutated depth, then their market value wouldn't be so inflated. In the case of Shirking Fortification and damage absorb perks in general, so also physical aversion and elemental aversion, I believe they all should have a higher chance to randomly roll on gear as well. I don't understand why most of the refreshing perks and freedom perks and so on all have this near 6% craft chance on, this is Shadewalker shoes, but this is the same on most unspecialized items, basically most general crafts you can do, whereas the damage absorb perks are all around 3%. Getting a decent perk roll in New World is hard enough as is. There's no reason for Indestructible or Luck to roll at a much higher chance than perks that we actually want. On the topic of itemization, I also still believe that it is a very weird decision to not bring back the named loot on named mobs in Brimstone when their drops were enabled again. I think it's fine for this named loot to also be available from asset chests if that is important to the devs, but I absolutely believe that the named items should be farmable from the mobs again, and that seems to be the general consensus. This would give us more of a reason to go out and actually farm mobs, and especially farm mobs that we haven't farmed for ages yet. On the PvP side of things, we have similar issues when it comes to loot. Outpost Rush is the only farmable form of PvP that actually comes with good loot. War chests actually have pretty good loot as well, they have very good loot perks, but wars aren't as repeatable content. Arena on the other hand provides almost nothing, and actually in terms of PvP track is often slower than OPR as well. A very simple fix to this would be to give Arena a chest drop at the end as well, but this chest only containing one item with similar perks as Outpost Rush. Likewise, open world PvP drops could also be improved. I also believe the amount of Umbral shards that you gain from PvP modes should be increased across the board. I know you can get some extra Umbral shards from the PvP track, but the amount is incredibly low, even if you are at PvP track level 200 plus. I understand that mutations are a bit of a grind to get to the point where you can easily farm Umbral shards, but it doesn't actually take that long, and PvP should at some point get at least somewhat closer to that reward level. A completely different change that I believe would improve the game in many ways would be a rework of the attribute perk points, or the capstones of the attribute system. This is a massive topic by itself that I will tackle in the future, so if you'd like to see that, consider subscribing and clicking the bell. In the same sense, another thing that could easily be adjusted that I also will talk about in the future and look back at the past a little bit is the base stamina regeneration that we currently have in New World. It wasn't always like that, and there are pros and cons to the current and the past systems, and that's something that I want to discuss, but that is way too big for this video. A change that could be made to make some underdog perks more appealing is combining Vigor and Invigorated. So in combination it would reduce both debuffs and damage over time effects. I think this combined perk would make it a lot more worth considering, for example, for heavy armor users, while still not being overly oppressive compared to the more prominent options like Shirking or Freedom. The new perk could just be called Vigor because Invigorated is already in there anyways, and all of the current Vigor perks on items would simply get the additional effects, while the Invigorated perks would be converted to Vigor. For things that require teamwork, I would really like to see a better ping highlighter. The current one is so small and often very close to the floor that it's very difficult to ping things for your allies and actually have them see them and notice that you're pinging in time. Having a bigger or more high contrast ping could help greatly. Along with that, I would really like to see an option to have a war-wide ping if you are one of the leaders in a war, one of the ones that has a crown basically. This would make things for shot callers much easier, and for some reason it was in the game at some point somehow. It used to work I think in invasions, but then was taken out, I guess. As far as I'm aware, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, they haven't fixed that until this day, and you can still only ping to your own group in wars. Another thing that affects wars, PvP in general, and also sometimes PvE, are the teammate markers. The ally markers that you get above your teammates are just not very visible at all because they're kind of off to the side. Because of that, trying to find your teammates in a clump of allies and enemies is basically Where's Waldo. People have found workarounds like using speech to text in-game for speech bubbles to show up above them, but really a much better solution would be to simply have the player icon for teammates be much larger and more visible above all other things, as it's for example the case in World of Warcraft if you mark something. Next we have some UI related things. These are a little bit harder to do because it takes a little bit more effort to implement them, but they could greatly improve the user experience. The first one is adding the filtering system that the trading post has already to our storages and to our inventory. I don't know why they didn't do that at the same time, but it seems like a very obvious thing to do. If I'm looking for example, Ancient Ward in my storage and I want to find which items have that, then just let me filter for Ancient Ward. Way too much time in New World is spent on sorting out your inventory and finding half-decent gear and then finding out which storage you put it in, so that should definitely be cut down in as many ways as possible. Another very common sense addition would be adding the search function that exists in the buy tab to the sell tab on the trading post as well. If I want to sell something and I want to sell it to a sell order, I currently have to go into the sell tab, which is kind of inconvenient in the first place, but then at least let me search for it. The filter function in the trading post itself could also be improved. At the moment you can select which perks you would like to be included in your search, but you cannot decide what you would like to exclude. Being able to exclude perks like luck or durable would make things a lot more convenient and more time saving when it comes to searching things on the trading post. Also, there should be an option to only search for specific perks and perk mix combinations. For example, at the moment, if I select Constitution and Strength, then I can either search for a single attribute only and only get Strength or pure Constitution, or I can not select that, and in that case I will get all pieces that have Strength and anything else, or Constitution and anything else. Instead, I would like an option that allows me to search for pieces that have Strength, Constitution, or Strength and Constitution. Another huge addition for the trading post would be a favorites option. On one hand, this could be favorites in the form of specific items that you search a lot and you just put a little star next to them and then they will show up first when you open the trading post. And on the other hand, this could also be perk combinations. So if there's a specific weapon perk combination that you often look for because you want to look for, say, a Transient Strikes, Ancient Bane, something else greatsword, and you haven't found the right one yet, then instead of having to select these perks every time you search something else in between or you just logged in or something, you could just click on that favorites option and be done with your check in a few seconds. For this next one, you may be thinking, wow, this is pointless because we're getting a better feature soon anyways, but hear me out here. I think it would be good to have an option to highlight items in different colors in your inventory and your storage. So they just get a specifically colored border so that you know that they belong together in some form, or you can quickly find them in your inventory. Now, we are getting gear sets in the near future in some form. However, on the roadmap this is described as a gear set storage system. And due to this wording, including the word storage, I am somewhat skeptical that this really means we will have gear sets in our inventory and easily accessible. I'm still somewhat worried that this will be something that will only be accessible from storage and therefore somewhat useless for things like mutations, where you also have to switch gear mid-mutation. But in either case, having this highlighting option would be good anyways, because it's something that can also be used for items that are unrelated to gear. If there's a specific item that you're farming that you want to highlight, or just something that you quickly need to find in your storage, then it could be used for that as well. And on the topic of storage, this is probably the hardest one to add here since it's actually a new feature, but then again, the feature already kind of exists in the form of the current storage, and that is a company storage system. Company crafting both for gear and consumables is very common, and it would be great to have a place to put that where members of the company can access it when they need to. Ideally, this would come in combination with a functioning ledger system for companies so people can see who took either gold or anything else out of the storage. I have another point, but this one is actually a bit easier than the ones I mentioned before, and that is removing Hearty and Stalwart from the town buffs. Now, I think Hearty and Stalwart are great perks, I just don't think they should be on towns at all. If you're unlucky and the companies of the towns you have your houses in are not updating their buffs, then you're basically screwed. Either you don't get the buff, or you have to move your entire house with all of its decorations that you may have and buy a new house in another town just to get the buff. Since these buffs have significant impact on combat, both PvE and PvP, I don't believe they should be influenced this way. Instead, I would suggest simply adding the current value from Hearty and from Stalwart onto the base value, unless they consider these values to be too strong, but then they should be readjusted anyways. This would also incentivize towns to actually put up more interesting mixes of crafting and gathering buffs. On the topic of Stalwart, I very recently made a video talking about Nimble and Stalwart and testing how good they really are. If you'd like to see that, I will link that right here. In the next days, we'll talk about an alternative gear loadout and why it may get better next patch, so if you'd like to see that, please consider subscribing and clicking the bell. We'll also soon talk about the attribute points as mentioned. Thanks for watching, Duke Sloth, out.